All right, I've got the official let's get started from Hannah. Welcome both of you to this meeting with our editorial board. I have a little more than half a dozen questions for each of you, and then at different points I'll give our board members opportunities to ask some questions as well. I ask each of you in your responses to be as concise as possible, and as the moderator I reserve the right to kindly draw you back in if I feel like we've covered something enough and we need to move on. Mr. O'Connor, I'm going to start with you. I would ask you to take maybe 3 minutes, introduce yourself, and tell us why you're running for Florida House in District 82.
Sure. Ed O'Connor. I am a semi-retired lawyer. I have degrees in physics with a minor in calculus from the University of Michigan. I have a doctorate in jurisprudence from Indiana University, and I've been a patent lawyer and antitrust lawyer for the last almost 50 years. I've tried cases at all, at all levels of courts, mainly federal, from district courts to the International Court of International Trade, to the Courts of Appeals, and 3 cases in the United States Supreme Court. So that's my basic cut and dirty background. I moved to Florida in 1970, practiced here for about 13 years. Then I moved on and moved to California, where I practiced law for some 30 years, and my specialty was in-house counsel for Intel, and I've had private practice for many years. Now I'm back. I've always maintained my residence in Jupiter, and I came back, and frankly I was quite disturbed by what I saw taking place in Florida government. And I was complaining about it, and finally somebody said, well, why don't you do something about it? And I said, well, because I'm busy. I said, well, busy doing what? And I didn't have a snappy comeback to that one, so I decided to do something. So that's what I'm doing. And if you want, I'll go into detail about the problems that I see.
Okay. For your first run for elected office?
My second.
Second.
Yeah.
When
First time I
was
ran
first?
just recently was in 1976, and I ran for the Florida House in Palm Beach County. We all ran at large in that race, and I lost because that other fellow just got me votes, and
That happens sometimes.
that was Tom Lewis that I ran against.
Okay.
So if I had to lose to anybody, I'm glad I lost to Tom Lewis.
Okay, thank you. Representative Magar, tell us about yourself and why you're running.
Sure. MaryLynn Magar, and I moved to Martin County 27 years ago, newly married, and just absolutely fell in love. After 10 minutes, I knew I was never going back. I've raised my family here, I've started a business here, and I plan to retire here. Everything I do and try to accomplish is really for the community, whether it's been involvement in the church or schools or in government. Like Mr. O'Connor, several years ago, I was frustrated with government, with politics at all levels. And someone also said, well, why don't you go do something about it? And that's what kind of pushed me into running those 6 years ago. I have not been a politician before that. I've been involved in helping other people get elected and voicing my opinion, but never really planned on a career in politics, and I still don't. I think that it's best to serve as a regular citizen and be part of your community to help represent and voice those opinions. But as far as climbing some political ladder, that's not me. But I plan to, over the next 2 years, make sure that I'm effective and widely represent this district and the problems and hopefully solutions that we'll come up with to put us on the right path.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to ask each of you to give Representative Magar a letter grade for performance in office the last 2 years and explain your answer. MaryLynn, I'm going to start with you.
I would give myself an A- because I think there's always room for improvement. I've always looked out for what's going on here in Martin County and Jupiter and Tequesta, kind of the treasure coast say that there's always, of course, perhaps more funding that people think you can get or get left on the table, things you can't get done. But that's why I'm going back, to get those things done. And I intend to make my last 2 years in the House an A+.
Okay, thank you. Mr. O'Connor.
Yeah, I give her a D, not because of anything she personally has done or not done, but because of what the Florida legislature has done. And she is part of the Republicans in the House who voted for the House leadership, the Speaker of the House, the Chair of the Ways and Means Committee. And as far as I'm concerned, they've been a disaster. And so I blame her and all the other Republicans who put those people in power. And frankly, I blame the voters of Martin County for voting for people who put those people in power. So it's nothing against her personally, it's the party. And people who say, vote for the person, not the party, are people who just don't know how government works. And this government is not working.
Okay, Mr. O'Connor, start with you. What is the most important issue for voters in this election in District 82?
Okay, I can't tell you because that's up to each individual voter, but obviously one of the top issues is the lake. And we have, one of the natural wonders of the world has been turned into a sewer, and that didn't happen naturally. People did that. People let that happen, and the people who let that happen are the people in charge of our government for the last 20 years, and that's the state government in Tallahassee, which has been controlled by Republicans. So to me, that probably, I think, at least in this area, is one of the most important issues. Also, failure to take Obamacare money, the Medicaid, has cost the state billions of dollars. Our teachers are, what, 45th in the country in terms of teacher salaries. That's a disgrace. And now we have, and there's lots of other things, but right now they're trying to do these constitutional amendments put forth by the state legislature to make it basically impossible to raise taxes requiring a 2/3 majority. People don't know what's in these bills. They sneak these things past all the time. And now they're upending zoning in Palm Beach, in Palm Beach County. There is a new city called Westlake. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It was created by 5 people because of a special act by the legislature to allow a developer to go and take over land. The entire city was nothing but developer-owned land. The 5 people who voted for it all had offices in the same building. They voted for that, and now, where it was previously zoned for 4,500 units, they're now looking at 45,000 units. Again, done by the legislature in secret. So all of these are top priorities. I can't see one over the other, and there are many others as well.
MaryLynn, most important issue for voters?
This year is, like it's been so many other times, I think the water issues that we're having, the discharges. And what's brought it, I think, even more into focus this year is when I first ran for office 6 years ago, the economy was a mess. And when I was knocking on doors, I was being told it was jobs. They needed work. Every 4th door that I knocked on, 4th or 5th door, either the person that answered or someone in the household was either out of work or had dropped down to perhaps part-time. Many were working 2, 3, 4 jobs. So that kind of, although we had the water issues, that was taking precedent over people because they had to pay for their homes, their food. But as the economy, as we've made some tough decisions and the economy has come back, I think we have begun as a community to focus more intently on solutions to the discharges. I think that we'll be able to build off of Amendment 1, off of Legacy Florida, to, I want to make sure that that money is being spent. And I also want to look at other ideas. Brian Massis recently talked about changing the LORS schedule. And I think for a long time, even myself, I've looked at that schedule in the May to October timeframe. And I think we have to look at it more on a year-round basis. So I'm very intrigued by his suggestions and to help push that. Now, I know that's a federal issue in the Army Corps of Engineers, but really, as this is a problem that goes through local government, state government, and federal government, we all have to work together. I also want to make sure that we're looking at, now that we've got a path towards storage south of the lake, storage and cleaning, more STAs north of the lake. and to make sure that the farms and the runoff, things coming from Orlando, the watershed coming down, is cleaned before it gets to the lake. So I can go on more about the lake if this is the time we want to talk about it, but I guess in conclusion, that is the topic. And even if I'm at an event down in southern Palm Beach County or in Orlando, people want to ask and talk about what's going on here in our backyard.
You actually anticipated my next question, which was related to our waterways and what needs to be done with them. You gave an excellent answer there. Mr. O'Connor, I want to give you an opportunity. What more needs to be done to preserve our waterways?
Well, first of all, let me disagree. I don't think this is a problem involving the federal government, which has nothing to do with this. This is an intra-coastal waterway. It's not an intercoastal waterway. It's not part of the federal waterway system. The Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for flood control. They have zero to do with algae, with effluents in the water, nitrogens, which is a polite way of saying the word that you always say when you stub your toe. The problem is, one place, it's not in county either. It's in one place and one place only. Tallahassee is responsible for controlling what goes into the waterways in this state, intrastate, and what goes in from those waterways into that lake. That lake is so polluted now that if you stop everything coming into that lake from Orlando and on that, if you stop that immediately, you still can't let that water loose out of the lake down into the Everglades because it's so polluted it would violate the federal injunction against doing so. That's why they have to have a reservoir to clean the water that's in there now. Something has to be done to stop this problem continuing to get worse, or it can never be solved. And it'll get to the point where that would just be, we'll have to walk away from that lake, and I don't know what's going to happen. That's an emergency situation that has come about because the Lake Okeechobee Protection Act has been deliberately ignored by all the people responsible for it in Tallahassee. That's the Senate, that's the House, that's the governor, that's the Agricultural Commissioner, that's the Attorney General, have completely ignored the limitations on nitrogens that can be put into that water. As I said, a polite word. There are strict limitations, and what they've said is, well, we'll just make it voluntary. We'll make it voluntary. You need to go in and look at what agriculture dumps into that water. You need to look at what's happened to the Kissimmee River that used to have the oxbacks, the switchbacks, so that it would take a long time to come, and now it just goes shooting right down there. It's an outrageous situation, and it's been brought about because, in my opinion, you have lobbying efforts by the sugar industry, you have developers, all of whom put, if you look at the figures, they're all there. The money that these people put into the Republican campaign coffers, they do it for a reason. It's outrageous. This is never going to be done until we clean house and give it to the people who are sitting there creating this problem over all these years.
Okay. Any response to that?
Well, first of all, this problem has not been just the past 20 years. It's been going on for almost 100 years. And we are taking action. We are putting the curse back in the Kissimmee River. I've actually seen that, and hopefully we'll be able to see a conclusion of that in the next 2 to 4 years. It's supposed to be done by 2022. Excuse me. We're also raising parts of the Tamian Trail, bringing up that and bridging that road so the water can flow south. I personally got involved in making sure that we funded the C-44 as well as Calkins Water Farm, which is a short-term storage area for us. I am absolutely promoting more cleaning of the water north of the lake as well as reservoirs there. But there have been things that have been done, and I want to make sure that over the next 2 years that we complete those items. When I first took office 6 years ago, and we talked about and laid out a plan for all of these projects, you know that you've got to go to bat and probably will never in your days in office see the completion, because these projects take so long and are of so much money. But we've also got to make sure that we stick with the path, and that we also are talking about this with other legislators and working with others to make sure that when you're gone, that someone else will be able to pick up the bag and get these things done. It's so important that we start checking these things off the list. Gil, when you and I took a ride, we saw what's going on with the Kissimmee River, and so there is progress. The Tamiami Trail, the storage areas, the reservoir to the south, I think is a game changer for this area, but we've got to make sure that it gets done.
Okay.
Can I make one?
Sure.
First of all, I don't agree this has been going on for hundreds of years. I moved here in 1970. When I left here in 1984, we didn't have blue algae, we didn't have red tides. This is a relatively recent problem. Secondly, I didn't hear a single word about doing anything to stop the people from dumping into the water. That's the cause. Everything else is, how do we clean up after what these people have been doing? Why do we let them keep doing it?
Okay, we'll leave that issue there. Let's move on to a different one. Let's talk about Brightline. For the last 4 years, Treasure Coast governments have pretty much moved in lockstep opposing Brightline, which announced about 5 years ago their plan to run from daily trains from Miami to Orlando. As time has gone by, it's become more apparent that there's pretty good reason to believe those trains are going to be coming through the Treasure Coast. Brightline has offered to consider putting a station or two in this region. My question for you is, what is your position on Brightline, and do you think local government or governments should pursue a Brightline station? Start with you, MaryLynn.
I've been concerned about this train from the very beginning, and we have got to make sure that there are safety measures in place. When I was up in Washington just a few months ago and Brightline was testifying, and they talked about the people that had been hit and killed by the train, it was almost like they said, well, most of those people were drug addicts or committing suicide. Kind of like they were doing us a favor. And I really took offense to that. We've had trains through the areas on those same tracks in that pathway for years and years. But, you know, chugga, chugga, chugga. They're slow, you hear them coming, you see them coming. These things are moving so fast, there is no time to react. That takes education, a cultural change, but also safety features, whatever they might be, technology that they need to take advantage of. It really will change safety measures and way of life here in the Treasure Coast. I mean, with our school buses stored on one side of the track and going back and forth every day. Here in Martin County and down in Jupiter, the hospitals are on one side of the track and most of the population on the other. So I'm very concerned about having those trains barrel through the railways next to the hospitals. Additionally, this is going to bring more and more freight and longer freight trains. And these trains have been known to clog up and sit across those crossings. Just last week down in Jupiter, the traffic was from the railroad tracks west to almost to 95. And I can tell you that one time, and not in an emergency situation, but shortly thereafter, I was waiting to cross the tracks to get back to the hospital. This is when it all kind of hit me about 4 years ago, saying this train was across all 4 crossings into Cuesta. There was no way to get around for me to get back to the hospital. So a 15-minute trip then took me 50 minutes. You know, this is something that needs to be addressed, and there needs to be safety measures in place. We've tried to have Brightline come to the table, talk to us about this, understand this, and up until this point, there has been none of that. I have asked them many times to hear us out, to come to the table, but only recently, when we're talking about issuing more bonds, do they dangle the stop here in the Treasure Coast in front of us. I think that the path that Brightline has chosen to come up the FEC tracks is a dangerous one, and it will change our community forever. So I will continue to question them on that. The other thing that really irks me about it is the maintenance of those crossings have to be paid for by us locally in perpetuity. This is not the old train and the negotiation, the contract that was negotiated years ago. This is a new line, and I believe that if they're going to come through, this is a private business, then they need to maintain and upgrade those tracks.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there.
Okay.
Mr. O'Connor, your thoughts on the train?
I'm trying to remember the question. I thought the question was, would I support efforts to have local
Pursue a
stations?
broadline station or stations?
The answer is yes.
That was brief. Okay. Switch gears again. One of the criteria that we use in evaluating candidates is related to transparency in government and ethics. So I'm going to ask each of you to provide our board with an example of a time from your career, maybe not necessarily even in politics, but an example that displayed transparency or your commitment to ethics in a business environment, possibly a political environment. You can choose. We'd like each of you to share an example of that.
Ladies first.
Either one can go first.
It's hard being on the spot to come up with specifics. I have always tried to be an honest and transparent person in everything that I've done. In business, I often tell employees in dealing with our customers, you know, if we've got a problem, if something's going wrong, we need to talk to our customers. We need to tell people there's a problem now and up front. It only gets worse. Problems only get worse days later. So I believe that with problems, make sure that they're exposed and you work through situations. Ethically, that's part of it.
Okay. Before I go to Mr. O'Connor, maybe I'll ask it a little different way. It might be a little easier to answer. Can you think of an example or examples in the legislature where you voted to support either bills that related to ethics in government or transparency?
We talk quite a bit in the healthcare world, but I'm mostly in transparency, whether it's pricing or quality in healthcare, and I fully support that. As far as ethics politically, I think that we have pretty strong ethics in the Florida House, and we've tried to even increase that over the past few years. We've decided to change our rules from not just staying out of lobbying and people making money off of government for 2 years, but up to 6 years.
Right.
Because we wanted to stop that revolving door, as some people see it, between government and lobbying, which I consider just making money off of government.
Okay. And do you support Amendment 13? It's the constitutional amendment. It's been backed by former Senator Getz. That really goes even further with a lot of those restrictions on what lawmakers and state agency heads can do with respect to lobbying after they leave the legislature.
And I don't know all of the amendments by number right now. I'll study that, as most voters will after I get through today, this interview. But I'm perfectly comfortable with making sure that we hold our elected officials to the highest standards. As I stated before, I did not run for this office to climb some political ladder and to make money for myself or my company, but really is to take a turn to serve your community. So the tougher it is for people to profit off of government, I'm fine with that.
Okay. I might ask my colleagues while I go to Mr. O'Connor with this question, just to double check me on whether that was Amendment 13. I kind of pulled that out of the back of my head. I want to be sure, especially since we've got people watching us online. But Mr. O'Connor, I'll go to you. Can you provide us with an example of a time that displayed your commitment to transparency or ethics in business?
Not really. More easy to say, I can't think of a time when I haven't. The only thing in the legal business, of course, you know, is we have confidential conversations with clients. And one thing I've always done, and it's part of my ethics, is I've always told clients what they didn't want to hear. I never hesitated to tell a client no. And that would be the same way in the legislature. If I'm elected, I won't hesitate to say to my constituents or to anybody else, I think you're wrong, be right up front about it. I'm a very blunt person. You may have picked up on that. As far as the conduct of the legislature, and as the 13, I have read it, and I do support that. With regard to the actions of the Florida legislature, I'm focusing still on that. There is transparency, and then there's de facto transparency. This business that they pulled with this Westlake project, where they went in, passed a special law allowing 5 people to create a city so a developer could put in thousands of units. That to me was unethical. Now, was that information available to the public? Sure. Did they publicize it? Did they hold big public hearings and let people know what they were doing? They did the same thing in Hope Sound. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they had recently had a referendum on whether Hope Sound should become a city. Well, guess what made that possible? A special law by the Florida legislature. Why did the Florida legislature find it important to pass a special law for Hope Sound? And it didn't pass. And I'm convinced in my own mind that had.
I do think there was a lot more transparency with the Hope Sound issue than there was with the Westlake one.
There was, but I don't know if there was. In the first place, there were no, as I understand, no public hearings on this matter. It was the Chamber of Commerce was behind it, and that was one of the reasons there was so much opposition to it. This also came right at the same time that DeVos was trying to put out a project there just west of I-95, not within those city limits, but right next to them, so they could be probably annexed. So to me, this whole thing of like doing deals that people, the general public doesn't know about, whether or not it's publicly available, they don't make it publicly, they don't publicize it. The state legislature doesn't publicize these matters, and I think that's really bordering on unethical.
Rich, may I comment on Hope Sound?
Just real quick for the record, it's Amendment 12.
Is it 12?
13 is the dog race.
I was so close, okay.
I just want to comment on Hope Sound because I did carry that local bill. It wasn't any kind of special backroom deal or anything. It was a local bill that was voted on by the delegation. And I carried it forward, and all that bill did was to open it up to the community, to allow them to make the decision whether they wanted to be a city or not. Now, the year before, I carried for Indiantown, and Indiantown did decide they wanted to incorporate, whereas Hope Sound did not. And you're right, that new development would be outside of the borders of Hope Sound, so that did not really have anything to do with it. And there was no reason for me to carry this other than this is what the constituents of Hope Sound wanted, the opportunity to voice their opinion.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple more questions, but I want to open it to the board at this point.
Sure, another one of our criteria that we grade you on is safeguarding taxpayers' money. So I want to ask specifically, Florida is a state where there's a lot of anti-tax sentiment, as you know. At the same time, there's a lot of complaints, and here I'm thinking primarily public education, that in fact there's significant underfunding. Obviously, sufficient, or what some people would consider a sufficient level of funding takes more taxes. How do you balance the need to keep a lid on taxes and be responsible with taxpayers' money, and at the same time provide the resources that school districts or others may need? And I'll start with Magar.
Well, obviously there's choices every year, and in Florida we have a balanced budget, so we can't just print money or borrow it from China or whatever the federal government may do. And so there are tough choices. Our education, I think we've made good choices because we've recently been ranked number 4 in education in K through 12, and our higher ed was ranked the top state system in the country. And now we've got a University of Florida at number 8. So I think that we are on the right path with education, but it is about choices and making sure that that's where we want our money to go. And all parts of the state are all pulling for different issues, and that's why it's important to have a strong delegation, and for Martin County to send me back to Tallahassee, because I understand the issues, and entering the last couple of years here, will be able to have more influence to get those things done, especially those that are important to us here in Martin County.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yeah, first of all, that constitutional amendment that the Florida Legislative Committee has recommended, and I forget which one it is, but the one that requires a 2/3 majority to raise any taxes, that means you'll never get a tax increase in Florida, ever. And I think that the part of the problem is to assume that the people of Florida are so selfish that they care so much about not paying one more nickel in taxes that they're willing to let this public educational system go down the toilet. And right now, 45th in the country in teacher salaries is an outrage. They have unfunded mandates relating to the school shootings, where these schools are told to go out and hire armed guards and do this, and then at the same time they're having charter schools that are taking money away from the public schools. And at the same time, these charter schools are able to use resources belonging to the public schools. Everything they do cuts and cuts and cuts. In Martin County, they just had a referendum, and they voted to increase taxes for education. The people in Florida are not that selfish, and we need to stop worrying about never raising taxes so that people can be encouraged to retire here and do nothing, and start focusing on building the kind of economy that we need here, like they did in California with Silicon Valley. They did that by building the top level educational system in the country, and nobody in his right mind would say that Florida's public educational system is one of the top in the country. It's hurt, and it's really hurt because we don't pay our teachers, and we don't pay our teachers because of this constant push with the Republicans in Tallahassee to say no taxes, won't raise your taxes, 2/3 majority to raise taxes. They've got another amendment in there which increases the homestead exemption for houses above a certain value, which will save the average person maybe a couple $100s a year. But if you own a $50 million home, you'll save a lot of money. It's always the case. So we need to stop treating the people in Florida as though they don't care about this community, as though they're not willing to pay anything for our education or to make this state what it can be. This has potential to be the best state in the country, and it's not living up to its potential, and that's one of the reasons.
Okay, thank you. Mr. O'Connor, I see that my colleague has a microphone in her hand, so I'm going to make a hard right.
I've got a question for both of you. Representative Magar, I'd like you to point to a legislative victory that you're most proud of in your 6 years in office, and then I'm going to turn it to you with a slightly different question, Mr. O'Connor. So what have you passed that you're proud of?
Well, let me divide it up two ways: appropriations and then policy goals. So appropriations, working on those appropriations that funded things like Calkins Water Farm, and starting to think about other areas of creating solutions for the discharges that we're receiving. Additionally, I have worked to make sure that the triangle between FAU, Scripps, and Max Planck is solid. So building a brain institute at FAU is another appropriations that I've worked on for a long time, because I believe that in having good, strong business and an economy here in the state, it has to have good, strong education. And so we need to go hand in hand and partner between our higher ed and our companies here. Policy-wise, when I first campaigned, as I said, 6 years ago, and the economy was quite different, and people were out of work, and we saw that our economy had been built on construction, agriculture, tourism, which are all great, strong industries in Florida now, but we needed to look at other areas where people could have not just jobs but careers.
What bill did you file?
And so I filed a bill on manufacturing to expand manufacturing by lowering and eliminating eventually the sales tax on manufacturing equipment. And in that time, manufacturing has grown quite a bit. So that does diversify our economy and helps bring about changes in careers. Additionally, I like to work on...
I'll stop you there because I just asked for one. Thank
Okay.
you for that. Mr. O'Connor, if elected, you obviously have a lot of concerns about the way the legislature has conducted business. What would be the first bill that you would file?
I would file a bill requiring, I'm sorry, okay. There probably would be several, but one of the first would be a bill requiring the governor to enforce the Lake Okeechobee Protection Act and restrict what people can put in the water. That would be a simple one to do. The act is already there. It's just being ignored.
Thank you.
A few minutes ago, Mr. O'Connor, you mentioned, you referenced school safety. I'd like to first to talk for a few minutes about the gun law that the legislature passed earlier this year in the wake of the Parkland shooting. As the two of you know well, lawmakers passed a bill that had three main components to it. It raised the age to 21 for those who can purchase long guns. It banned bump stocks, and it allowed law enforcement with a court order to remove guns, weapons from an individual that the court would deem mentally incapacitated. So my question for you, and I'll start with you, MaryLynn, is did the legislature go too far or not far enough with that gun legislation?
I think with the legislation, we took some time and acted very quickly, but we took some time and effort to talk to many members so that we were getting a lot of different input. That was a bill that, you know, so many groups on both sides were not in support of because they didn't like one thing or another. But I felt it was very important that we act and act quickly. So not making the NRA happy or not making another group happy was really not the concern. We changed the age limit for purchasing a rifle from 18 to 21. The NRA was not happy about that. I saw that as it's really just a judgment call on the age. Why 18 or 21? Just like drinking ages or other driving ages, the age to run for a certain office varies. That was not a stopper for me, even though I am supportive of the Second Amendment. There were also other issues in there that friends of mine across the aisle didn't want to support. But in the end, I think we all thought it was important to put aside small issues in passing the larger bill. Now, I think that there are things that need to be tweaked in it, and more funding for mental health or school safety, addressing technology within the schools will have to be addressed. But like any big issue and new bill that comes out, I think it will always have to be tweaked.
Okay. Mr. O'Connor, too far or not far enough?
I think it was a joke. It was pathetic. You can't buy an AR-15 at 18, but you can at 21. I tell you, I don't care how old you are. If you have an AR-15 and you shoot me, I'm not going to like it. That to me was absurd. That was just throwing out crumbs for public opinion. The bill, part of the bill that allows the seizure of guns, that's almost impossible to implement if you read it carefully. It's very difficult. And the bump stocks, who's buying bump stocks? So, except for that one nutcase in Nevada. They completely ignore, because the NRA has the Republican Party in his pocket, and that's a fact of life. No restrictions on AR-15s. No restrictions on military-style weapons. I grew up in the military. Nobody who's not in the military should have a military-style assault rifle. No restrictions on bullets. Every time you have one of these spree killings, you have thousands and thousands of rounds of ammunition. Who is able to go out and buy thousands of rounds of ammunition? You can't go buy cough drops in the drugstore without giving them your photo ID, and they check how many you bought that month. But you can buy all the bullets you want. They're doing nothing about this. Background checks. There are no universal background checks. They still have all the loopholes, including at gun shows, and you can buy anything you want at gun shows. These people that come across the border in South America, these drugs, they get their guns at gun shows. This thing is an absolute travesty, what they're doing here. They need to start getting serious about gun control. And I know that's not popular in some places. I don't care.
Okay, thank you. I have one final question, unless I have any other takers. Seeing none, I'd like to give each of you 60 seconds to tell us why voters should choose you in November. Mr. O'Connor, I'll start with you.
Sure. Fundamentally, because I think we need to break the logjam in Tallahassee. And it's not going to be done unless there's a wholesale sweep and the Republicans in Tallahassee are removed. Now, if the Democrats get back in power, as they were when I used to live here in the 70s, and they do the same terrible job, then they should be thrown out. But you can't sit here and look at what's taken place in this state in the last 20 years, not the last 120 years, the last 20 years, and say this is fine. They're just, everything is fine, they're doing okay. Remember Einstein's definition of insanity. Keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. When you keep voting the same people in office, don't expect a different result.
Okay, thank you. MaryLynn?
So I've lived here going on 27 years, like I said, raised my family here, I've built a business here, and I'm committed to this area. I didn't think I would be in politics, but here I am. And I intend to make the next 2 years beneficial for this community. There may be people that can better articulate or have been in positions that they can talk more with more flower than I can, but no one will work harder for this community. I've knocked on thousands of doors over the years, tens of thousands, and I will continue to do that, make sure that I have an open door all the time to understand what's going on in all of this district, and to make sure that I'm talking to people, not just hearing about things or reading them in the paper, but actually seeing how it affects people in the community. And I'll make sure that I continue to do that. I will work hard, maybe not always at the front of the line for the microphone, but I'm the one behind the scenes making sure that things get done and talking to other legislators about what's important here in the community. And I sure hope to get back to Tallahassee and do that for 2 more years.
Representative Magar, Mr. O'Connor, thank you for your time today. We appreciate it.